Is having a good week thus far, and hey, we are honored that you're here. This is the first Wednesday night offering of our Elephants in the Room, tackling the big topics. For those of you that were here on Sunday morning, you kind of got a little bit oriented to what we're doing here in the month of January. But what a better way to kick off 2026 than to talk about our well-being, talk about our kiddos' well-being. So hopefully this will align with a lot of your personal goals for the year as we try to create just a healthy lifestyle for ourselves. And then that just really empowers us and enables us to model for our kiddos healthy living. And so we're honored that you're here. We hope that you're able to partake in as many of the offerings that we have. Let's check out the next slide. This shows you all of the different sessions that we have coming up. So on our Sunday mornings, the next couple of weeks, we're going to be tackling the topics of anxiety and depression. And we have a couple of excellent speakers coming in talking about that. And then the final week will just be kind of like a table group process, similar to what we did in the first week. And then on the Wednesday nights, Robin and I, my colleague and friend, will be talking the first couple of weeks here. And then the last 2 weeks, the last two Wednesdays of the month, we are really blessed here at Southwest to have a number of folks who are licensed counselors, and we're going to be doing kind of a panel discussion. So one of the things we're going to invite everyone to do, this is like sort of a series on let's manage technology, but you're all invited. Let's go to the next slide here. You're all invited to pull out your phones right now and scan the QR code, because if we have 2 weeks to do questions and answers, it's going to be kind of a quiet conversation if we don't have plenty of questions posed. So I invite everyone to pull out your phone, scan the QR code, and your confidential question can be asked. And we did this, like 3 or 4 months ago with the teens.
Yeah.
And we're really encouraged by just the honesty of some of the questions that they were asking us. So we don't promise to have all of the answers, but please know that all of your questions will be treated with respect, and we will certainly do our best as a collective group. I think there's going to be like 7 or 8 of us maybe on a couple of those nights that will do our best to just share our knowledge and experience in talking about these important topics. So again, the submissions are going to be anonymous. What we'll probably do is group questions. So we may get some very similar questions, and so we'll just see how many of those questions we get and then do our best in those 2 weeks to just have some real conversations. So any kind of question in any area, we invite your candor and your honesty, and we'll do our best to give some feedback there. Let's move to the next slide here. All right. Robin, parenting is hard, but rewarding.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that audience is awfully small, isn't it? I tell my clients all the time, I had a sociology professor tell me one time, nobody gets out of childhood with a full deck of cards. And so this is how many of those people, I guess, got out of childhood with a full deck of cards. It's very difficult.
Yeah, there is no such thing as the perfect parent or the perfect kid. So the reality is, I've just told my kids, I'm going to screw you up in a different way and hopefully to a less degree than what my experience was, right? I mean, that's all we can hope for here. And so one of the things we want to do is just acknowledge the reality of how challenging parenting is. It is very rewarding, but it's very hard because guess what? Kids don't come with a manual, right? And as much as even though we can read all the things about, what experts might say about it, or even what God reveals in His Word, the reality is every single child is a unique, wonderfully created person that will have traits from probably both of their parents and then a bunch of other things, and you're like, who is this kid and where did they come from? So the reality is all kids are unique, all parents are unique, and so the parenting journey is often filled with many highs and lows. And so one of the things that I think we can draw a little bit of strength and courage from, let's look at the first family briefly. Think about this, guys. Adam and Eve were the only 2 humans to know what it was like to live in a perfect world free from pain, sin, and suffering. And how did it work out for the first family? So here's my bad, maybe off-color joke. If you have 2 kids and as long as one kid doesn't kill the other one, you're doing better than Adam and Eve. Think about that for a minute. That's a sobering reality, right? But they literally grew up in the same family, hearing all the stories about how good God is and how they kind of screwed things up. And yet they got to adulthood, and what happened? One was faithful and one wasn't. And the reality of it is, I remember this goes back a way. This kind of dates me, but this is probably like, how many of you guys remember when Lynn and Jerry Jones came and did their parenting thing? I don't know, guys. Was this like 15 years ago, maybe? I can't do the math on it. I just know that at the time I felt woefully unprepared as I was asked to pinch hit because Jerry had become really ill. And so I had to like co-present with Lynn, and I didn't, I don't even know if I had kids yet, but that's how far back it was. But I'll never forget the biggest thing that came out of that. We were doing some Q&A, and this person was asking about, what happens when the kids get to adulthood. And Lynn said the most profound thing. Guess what? You're going to take too much credit or too much blame for the outcome. And man, that was so liberating to me, because guess what? It does matter. Like, our influence is so important. Let's look at our next slide here. The reality is our influence is so important, but there's just so many variables that are going to influence the outcome. And what this is, maybe we can't read everything on the screen. This is called the Dunning-Kruger effect in parenting. And essentially what this gets at is the reality that when we first start out, we usually have too much confidence about thinking that we'll figure this out and everything will go well. And people usually have the most knowledge and experience, have too much confidence. And then sometimes when you have too much knowledge and self-awareness, you have too much insecurity about something. And so if you kind of look at the parenting journey, by the time your kids get to the launch phase, this last little item arrives at the point where it says, trust me, it's complicated. So you might start out having all this confidence, thinking, oh, I really got this. And then you're going to go through the challenges of the parenting journey, and you're probably eventually going to get to the point to just saying, wow, that was rewarding but hard, kind of where we started tonight. And that's what we're going to see, is your knowledge and experience is a gift that nothing that we can say, no book that you read is going to give you all of the answers. A lot of it is, frankly, trial and error with the good Lord's help, right? And let's check out this next slide, because I think one of the things that Robin and I really want to convey to you is we think about this, and a lot of the times I was thinking about it, I don't like parenting classes historically, because usually coming out of it, I either felt more anxious or more guilty about how ill-equipped and just my lack of consistency of applying all the concepts that I know and try to help people with. So we want to bring a lot of humility into this conversation throughout this series and just acknowledge that we're not going to always have all of the answers or do it perfectly, and that's okay. But we don't want this to be like a guilt-based kind of anxiety-producing experience. We are going to talk about some hard things about the broken, fallen world that we live in and how more challenging and complicated it's gotten with different technological influences in our lives. But we also want to get back to the basics here and just say, guess what? God is good. And God is faithful and true, and God is with us in this parenting journey. As much as you think you can love your kid, God loves your kid 1,000,000 times more. Think about that. Our kids are just rentals. He is the ultimate father, and however much we can care and love our kids, God cares and loves for them exponentially more. And to me, that's very comforting and liberating to know that I have responsibilities in how I'm going to try to teach and model and love and instill in my kid all of these virtues and qualities that I want for them to embody. But guess what? God is the perfect father, and He's all of our kids' father as they age, they choose to look to Him and choose to honor Him. And then the other thing, Coleman highlighted this, much of the research over the last 40 years on parenting keeps coming up with the same answers. And that is, the single greatest influence on your kids' development is you. There's all of these other worldly influences, good and bad, that will shape your kids' development, but you are the single greatest and most important influence.
It's my turn. Jeff likes to talk. Have y'all noticed that? God love it.
They gave me a mic.
They did give you a mic. So talking about influence on your kids, there's this idea that lots of people will talk about, nature versus nurture. And the idea that we all have a nature of some sort. We have physical characteristics that, we can't change. We either have blue eyes or brown hair or whatever else. And also some of our personality traits are kind of hardwired. I am a tidy person, and as much as I try to be a little messy sometimes and not worry about it, my nature is to be tidy. So those kinds of things are part of us. So all your kids have these things that are part of them. And that influences how they go about living their life. But also there's the nurture part. And this is where we're talking about the influences on your kids. So the people in their lives, the experiences that they have, the values that they're taught. Like, we don't come out of the womb a Christian, for example. We are taught Christian values, and then we choose to follow Christ at some point. That's a nurture sort of thing, because not every person experiences that, right? In reading this book, I'm assuming you all maybe know the book, maybe you don't, but there was a couple of interesting
Let's check that
things.
out, actually.
Yeah.
Show of
Raise your
hands.
hand.
How many people are familiar with the book?
Ancient
Generation. We got a few?
Yeah? Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, about half.
So some interesting things that the author points out that I thought was really interesting. I love the idea of like how brains work. And so one of the things he wrote was that by the age of 5, 90% of your brain structure is at adult size at 5. But what's not there is all the experiences and the things that are going to come and shape how your brain operates. That is where the nurture part comes in. So activities that are repeated change the way you think. So if you are, if you take piano lessons starting at the age of 3, your brain is going to mold to knowing how to play the piano. Or if you, fill in the blank with whatever that is. But I think that's really neat that we have all that we need at 5, but then the rest of the time is really about shaping and really honing who this person's going to be through this nurture part of things. And one of the most critical periods, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit later, is this period from about the age of 9 to 15, that's the most sensitive place for this cultural development, like who your kid's going to become and the influences that are going to have. And gosh, think about what happens between the ages of 9 and 15. All the things that come at us, all the experiences we begin to have. And that brain is really, it's malleable. It's like plastic. It's going to mold to whatever those things are. So that's all nurture stuff. So we really want to think about like, what are we putting in our kids' lives and experiences that are going to mold and shape who they become.
Yeah, and let's broaden this out a bit further to this concept of our series topic, which is mental health. And one of the complexities, I'll tell you this, after studying this stuff for a few decades, it's like the more I learn, the more humble I become in thinking there's so much more to try to understand, because there's so much complexity and mystery when it comes to how we think, how we feel, and how we act. Right? And there's so many of these factors. So when we talk about something like mental health, there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. And just as we talk about this interactional effect between nature and nurture impacting different areas of our life, our mental health is really shaped by these interactional factors. So for example, some people who struggle with like anxiety and depression, they're going to have a combination of both biological components. So aspects of their personality typology, aspects of their neurochemical functioning, aspects of again, their stress response. All of these things happening inside of their body are based on genes and chemicals in the brain that are going to impact their mood, right? So part of good mental health is contributed by what's going on in our biology. And then there's all these other factors that are also going to shape our mental health, like Robin was talking about, what our experiences are over time. And then the older we get, what is our self-talk? So all of us are engaged at times in interactions with other people or focusing on a task. But think about this. A lot of our time is just when we talk about mental health, a lot of it comes down to what are the conversations inside of your own heart and mind, right? And what is shaping those conversations? Some of my favorite scriptures, things like, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? Romans 12. God's invitation to say, your brain and how you think and what you put in and what you ruminate on is going to affect how you feel and how you act. So if bad is coming in, guess what? That's going to affect how you feel and how you act. If good is coming in, that's also going to shape some of the ways that you're seeing God, seeing the world around you, and as important, how you're seeing yourself. And so much of this modern research that's looking at, think about this, guys. So in a former life, Ben would know this. So I spent like 2 years getting a history degree that I've never monetized. Like, I guess it's cool if we're playing Trivial Pursuit and I'm on your team, but it's really not benefited me in any practical way in my career. But I've always loved history. And one of the things we saw with history is there's always been integration of technology throughout human history. Like when the wheel came around, that was pretty transformative, right? When fire was created. Like there's all these things that have impacted the human lived experience. But many of these things have been incremental and gradual to how they have impacted how we actually live and function, right? And we can look at throughout human history this being the case. And then all of a sudden, like in the last quarter of the 20th century, computers had been around for a while, but what a game changer. The way that the internet transformed the way that we live our daily lives. In some ways, really simplified things, really makes things more efficient. There's a lot of cool things that comes with what's happened here. But in other ways, it's created all of these new and unique challenges. And so I was listening to an interview with this author, Jonathan Haidt, and one of the things he was saying in all of his research, so he's basically like a social scientist who just looks at the human experience and how culture impacts human development. And the more that he'd been looking at these different generations, if we move to the next slide here. Actually, let's jump one more ahead and we'll come back. One of the things that he's talking about is every generation has new challenges, right? But in terms of our relationship with technology, it's really that Gen Z that is our test study, right? This is the test study because they are the first what we would call digital natives that during their formative years, we gave them the phone or the iPad. Right? So if you're like me, I'm a Gen Xer. The first time I ever even got on the computer was when I came to Arkansas State University in 1995, right?
I didn't have a cell phone till I was in college.
Yeah. So a lot of us
without the internet.
Yeah, a lot of us, like, we've always had technology in our life, but it really, like, exploded once we had, like, handheld streaming devices. And that was really a lot of the game changer for this research that we're talking about. And so one of the things that Jonathan Haidt said is what's happened over the last 30 years in modern American culture is we've had parents being like overprotective and overregulating in the real world and like underprepared and underregulated for the online world. And we've really seen that play out over the last couple of generations. So Gen Z, what's our age range here?
1997 to 2010. So if you have a child or are yourself between the ages of 29 and 16, you are Gen Z. And you're a generation that has never known a world without not just technology, but in your pocket, in your hand, at all times technology. iPhone came out in 2007, so that was obviously, again, a real game changer we all have that in the palm of our hand. So, and who's raising that generation? So, older millennials, if you're, my gosh, I did the math. Oh, I didn't do the math on that one. Never mind. If you're an older millennial, you may have a Gen Z, or some of us Gen Xers are raising Gen Z as well. And we're very different. Obviously, again, I'm Gen X. I lived in a world where technology and the internet didn't exist at all, and now I'm raising kids who that's all they know. They might go through withdrawals if we took all the technology away. And so we're very different in the way we think about, like, how do we use this technology? When I got technology, my brain was fully formed and I could discern all these things. And when we talk about nurture, this generation was the first to really have this experience shape them in a way that I don't think anybody probably predicted, but now we're seeing what the impact of that has been. And unfortunately, the impact has been a worsening of mental health issues for these kiddos.
Yeah, and you think about just the lived experience that that nurture during formative years. I mean, if you were like Gen Z, think about your childhood development. Like there were different influences, but the most strongest influences tended to be your local community, right? Who was in your family, who you went to school with, who you went to church with. And then obviously, for a lot of us, MTV, things like, so television was around.
VH1.
But again, the world felt a little bit smaller, didn't it? And now what's happened with the Gen Zs and the younger generations is the entire world is their influence. I remember when my kids were, mine are 20 and 16, but my kids loved watching like these YouTubers who would like do these silly, like they would open toys and review them and all this kind of stuff. And I remember we were doing some kind of thing when our kids were asked like these questions about people who influenced them and everything. And of course they did all the typical, mom, dad, grandparents. But also in the conversation was some random person in, LA who opens toys for a living and, reviews them. And I thought, it just kind of struck me as odd. It's kind of like, a person who has influence in my kid's life is this random stranger because my kids are watching all of these YouTubers who are from all over the world. And that's the challenge that we're seeing in a lot of this is technology is a tool that's not inherently good or evil. It can be a tool for good or evil. And so much of this research is just saying, it's not like we need to say, oh, let's go to the dark ages and not have any technology.
Yeah, it's not tech.
Which is what some people's extreme reaction is. That's not what we would be suggesting or even some of the recommendations. It's just how do we do it in a way where we have more awareness of the influence and the impact. We're not just essentially, and guys, I know that this is so tempting, but essentially the iPhone or the iPad has become the new modern babysitter. And guess what? It works. I don't like my kid, when they were younger, screaming, yelling, always wanting my focused attention. It's really easy just to say, here you go, honey, right? And just kind of, and that's become a cultural norm, frankly. And that's what Haidt talks a lot about, is parents often go into it with good intentions of having some kind of control or limitations, but invariably what happens is we end up getting lax with it. And for most families, it just sort of becomes, if there's not from the beginning some kind of expectations or really a model for how we're going to have a relationship with screens, then what happens is it just sort of becomes this member of the family that the person is spending as much time with their relationship with their screen as they are other humans. And now we have a couple of generations, as the book gets into, that now we're beginning to look at this longitudinal data that says, okay, now we have a whole society of these two generations that we're seeing all of these common challenges as it relates to health and well-being.
Yeah. Have you ever sat down in a restaurant and looked around at tables of families and everybody is looking at their phone? We're not having conversation and those sorts of things. That's just become normal. Whereas there were many generations before where we would have thought that was strange, but now we see it as just the thing that you do. But unfortunately, what that has taken away is this idea of embodiment, which is being with each other. There's so much in the virtual world that the Gen Z and on, have not learned the ability to be with people in the same way and have those interactions. And again, it's not that all technology is terrible, but the further we have moved from that, the more we have seen the mental health struggles that have happened with these kiddos. Isolation, depression, anxiety. We're going to talk about some things that have gotten in the way of being able to be resilient in those things. And so being able to have a good standard and norm for how we have technology in our families in a way that doesn't negatively impact our kids' mental health. I will be the first to admit that most nights at my house, maybe all four of us are in the same room and we're all on a different device.
How many of you guys that's true for you at your home? Full disclosure. A lot of us? Okay. And not always a handheld device, but the TV's always on at my house.
Absolutely. The TV's on, and you're looking at your phone, and you've got the iPad going, and and somebody's gaming, and So we're in the same room, but we are not engaged and connected, and that just becomes just how you do it, right? Except there's a consequence to that we don't see until it's already happened.
Yeah, when we get really pragmatic about it, and we'll highlight some of the practical ways to navigate some of this stuff, but you think about it, life's a math problem. We have 168 hours in a week, okay? And we all can take some personal accountability into this. How was your time spent? right? And this is the thing that I think a lot of the research is coming back is it's just that too much time is being spent with technology and not enough time is being spent as humans throughout human history have spent their time, right? And this is part of why we're struggling to figure it out, is because like this is literally a new thing that the past few generations have dealt with that no previous generations have dealt with. Most previous generations, of course, had problems and challenges, but they were different than what they are now. And that's what we're learning, is it's more about what is, like, I like to think about it like this. This is an inanimate object, but if I'm spending a lot of focused attention on it, there's a development of a relationship. And so I think the question as parents we all have to ask is, how strong is my kid's relationship to this inanimate object versus their relationship to the human beings? Right? And I think for a lot of us, myself included, sometimes just for coping and stress relief, like I've got too strong of a relationship with my phone or my TV. And we all have these different things, but to me, part of the accountability is looking at, what do I want those ratios to be? How much time do I actually want for me and the people that I live with to be spending staring at a screen versus some kind of shared activity?
Yeah. I think the next slide is a good one to talk about, like how this has gotten in the way. It's called the great rewiring of childhood. I don't know if any of y'all relate to, if you played out in the street and remember yelling car, you had an awesome childhood. Like that, it was just so different to be with people and doing things. And we've shifted from this play-based childhood to a screen-based or a phone-based. And what that's done is that's taken away the opportunity, not just for connection, but for learning how to manage things like risk. We're going to talk about safetyism in a minute. There's this idea that we've moved from kids being in what we call discover mode, where they're interested and they're exploring and they're learning the world, to this defend mode, which is always looking for the threat and the thing that's going to be scary and trying to prevent that. And that's just, again, a shift in the way that shapes our brain and how then they handle the difficulties of life. I'm probably jumping ahead, but I want to say this. So in our practice, we see probably 10 and up, I would say, kid-wise. We don't see anybody younger than 10 usually. But one of the things that I have noticed over, I don't know, the last 10 years or so, I've been doing this a long time, and what this research has basically confirmed is these young adults who get out into the adult world and don't know how to be resilient when it gets difficult. When they come up on even just normal challenges, not even the big stuff, just normal challenges, having no grit or resilience to know how to do that. And the book would say, and I would agree, that a lot of that is because we've taken away that opportunity when we've shifted our focus to screen-based stuff. So we might talk more about that later.
It's kind of tough because we kind of think, and again, this parenting journey is so unique to each person and each family, and like family just looks so different in today's world than what it used to. Encouragingly, like a lot of the research talks about, not all families. In fact, you're in a minority today if you're a kid raised from birth to 18 in a quote unquote traditional nuclear family. That accounts for about a third of families today. About 2/3 of kids are going to be raised in a situation that would be step family or single parent home or adoption or, any other number of things. And the hopeful thing in the research, as long as the kid has a responsible, loving, nurturing adult, the outcomes can be really good. So kids getting time and focused attention and love. And I think for a lot of us, we struggle on this kind of continuum of like the helicopter parent where everything is like controlled and rigid, or at the other extreme, like the laissez-faire kind of hands off, do whatever you want.
Free range.
Free range, yeah. It's like we're all trying to find that perfect balance between these two extremes. And along the way, a lot of times it's some trial and error before we figure it out. It's really funny when you look at like birth order. It's like with the first kid, a lot of parents are super, like type A, and if you have multiple kids over a long period of time, by the time the last one comes along, you're just like, whatever. It's okay. Just like because you've kind of been through a lot of it, and like you just get to this point where it's sort of like kind of like that Dunning-Kruger thing where it's you just appreciate the complexity of it. But what he's saying in generalities is this safetyism. Let's go to the next slide. What we've done as a culture is, again, over-parented in the real world, under-parented in the online world. And so for a lot of things, like Robin was saying, it's this classic what we might call failure to launch, that we want to be able to expose our kids to difficult situations. That's just a natural part of life, but then not always solve or rescue them from it. And what he's really finding is part of what parenting is, frankly, is just life skills training. How does the world work? The world's not always going to solve or fix all of your problems, right? You're going to have to figure out, and the real thing is having that confidence in what we would call self-efficacy, perceived confidence and competence. And if children moving into like adolescence and then adulthood never develop like the skills to problem solve, the skills to navigate difficult situations and have some parental guidance or support, but also have the confidence that I can do this.
To handle it themselves.
That I can handle it. And that's what we've seen with a lot of this. There's a lot of correlation between, the Gen Zs and the struggles with successful adulting simply because they've not been provided with either love and nurture or enough opportunities to kind of go through some of these struggles and learn how to navigate it. And so we all, as parents or caregivers of a child, we have different responsibilities and influences. But I think the thing we have to think about is just what's the appropriate level of stress that our kids need to be exposed to and then work themselves to navigate through some of it versus us always being the protector, provider, that kind of thing.
When we talk about, if you go to the next slide, the increase in resilience, how do we do this with our kids now? Now, obviously, if you've raised your kids maybe in this generation and they're still working through that as young adults, then this might not apply as much. But if you're in the thick of it and or you're on the beginning of it, like you're not raising Gen Z, you're on to raising Gen Alpha. These are the kinds of things that we want to think about, like giving them age-appropriate responsibilities, making small decisions for themselves, what to wear, helping with meals, managing allowance. We want to increase their ability to make decisions. If you haven't read Anxious Generation, I encourage you to do so. But one of the things he talks about a ladder to adulthood. And really this ladder starts at about the age of 6 with family responsibilities, chores, being part of a household. I taught my boys, I guess Travis was 8. I taught Travis to do laundry. He does his own laundry. I don't do his laundry. He does his laundry. He's about to be 11, and that's just what we do. But I wouldn't say that's probably the norm for most families, is to start that young. But at 6, really giving responsibilities and chores. I mean, age appropriate. I'm not asking him to scrub the baseboards or anything, but he's doing his part. And then moving up to about the age of 8, where you give some more freedoms, unstructured time without parents kind of hovering. Like, how many times do you guys let your kids just go, and do and make decisions and deal with minor conflicts with their friends and things like that? I think the safetyism would say, no, we need to monitor that, and we need to make sure they're okay, and we need to not have friend conflicts and things like that. But really that we need to move back toward the middle and letting kids have that a little earlier than maybe we do. At age 10, roaming and increasing freedom, like kids being able to, again, go further from parental supervision. And I will say this, I'm going to back up. I'm not saying every 10-year-old can handle that. Maybe you have an 8-year-old that can handle that. Maybe you have a 12-year-old that can handle that. These aren't exact things. It really does depend on your kid and your circumstances. But really thinking about, are we giving kids enough opportunity to learn how to navigate the physical world and the emotional world that comes with all that?
Yeah, and so if we're looking at, an inordinate amount of time, whatever that would be, is spent on a screen, there is some social engagement, but it's different than face-to-face interaction, isn't it? So much of social skills and learning and how that's applied in the real world, those skills aren't always being developed if too much of our time is being spent in the online world, and not enough is spent kind of navigating the natural developmental challenges of childhood. And then the last point here, this overscheduling, and this is just a cultural norm now. Most of us overschedule, our adult lives, and then the same things with our kids. We want our kids to be active and engaged, and one of the antidotes to like being on screens all the time is, hey, let's get totally involved in a bunch of like participatory activities, which is a good thing, but that can also be a challenge as well, as we want to find that balance between having some structured play, structured activities, but also just creating some space for interpersonal interaction with friends, with family, and then that free play. And those are all things that, again, that generation, we weren't thinking about it as much when we get, Gen X and older. That was just what our lives were. But with these newer generations, we have to be much more intentional because of how much our society looks and feels different than the world that we all grew up in.
Yeah, and, things like, I know we talk about play dates, for example, except those types of things are still parent structured and parent led, and what we're really talking about here is creating space for kids to lead the way in that and to be able to learn how to navigate that without as much kind of parental oversight, because that's how they learn to make good decisions and again, deal with conflicts, come up with their own solutions, that sort of thing, that we're not always in the middle of it doing it for them, basically.
Yeah, so let's look at our next slide here, and this is kind of the heart of what a lot of the kind of buzz stuff has been in terms of how this book has been marketed is really looking at this relationship between teens and screens. So this may not be reflective of your kid or your home, but this has become kind of a general cultural norm. And so a lot of this research has revealed that, teens are just spending a lot of time on their phones, right? So 4+ hours is the norm. For some people, it's probably double that. We know that there's what we would call correlation. So basically, the more time that's spent on screens, the higher the probability of these different types of mental health issues that we've noted. We also know this issue of like social development. It creates, I love this quote, comparison is the thief of joy, right? But then what happens? The more time we're spending online, the more it kind of builds into this mindset of comparative analysis. So if we're seeing people having fun and having a good time, and that's not really my experience, then it produces a lot of, negative self-talk or fear of missing out and all of these kinds of things. And for the brain that is still in development,
right,
they don't have the cognitive complexity to be kind of like, oh, I can see that a lot of that is just manicured and fake. Sure. It's sort of like people look to be happier and more connected than what I am.
Yeah. I mean, we're all, if you were on social media at all, you've probably seen a picture of maybe a friend of yours' family, and it's lovely and everyone's smiling and we all look so happy. And my brain can know that that's lovely, but that was shot 72 of 80 that they had to get that one perfect moment. Like, I know that. My 10-year-old tells me, I don't even remember what he told me the other day. And I said, where'd you hear that? He said, the internet. And I said, oh, baby, no, that's not real. Because his brain can't discern that kind of, if it's out there on the internet, he sees it must be true. And then again, obviously, when we talk about comparison, that's another way that that works out. So
well, now with the AI videos, how much can we trust anything?
Lord.
Right? Things that come up in your feed, it's like
if it's
like
too good to be true, it probably
like
is
I love
AI.
all these nature things, and I'll see like these things like, no way a lion actually did that. And I have to like, what's real, what's not real. So even the idea of reality, I'm a college professor, and probably what I've spent more time on in the last year. So like one of my jobs is I oversee all of our affiliate faculty at Colorado Christian, and I have to like equip them for all of these new challenges. I mean, the stuff with the AI, which is just, again, the next generation of what we're talking about. I mean, some of that stuff's kind of scary, right? When we're looking at essentially technology replacing a lot of the work that humans have done. So even from a financial perspective, there's concerns about how different industries will evolve when a lot of the work is done by a computer. So there's both, it makes some people's jobs way more efficient, but we also see these ongoing challenges of like, how is the development and the rapid development of technology without discernment going to continue to impact human civilization in these less than desirable ways? And I'm sure you guys in your various kind of backgrounds and fields have these conversations as well, because we have to figure out how do we use the technology for good. And certainly for our kids, there's things that it does. You want to know an answer to something? Google it.
Google it.
That's pretty cool. When I was a
Ask
kid,
ChatGPT.
like, let's pull out one of the volumes of the encyclopedia and rifle through it, right? Nowadays, like, any question you have, you can get at least some answer by Googling it, which is really cool. But that's just sort of become a lifestyle for so many people that then when my world is largely consumed by living in a virtual world and not the actual world, we see all of these potential consequences. And the sleep disruption, that's the other thing for a lot of the kids. You know, if there is no filters, if there is no like guidelines on it, there's a lot of kids that will literally be, I've had, you know, teen clients and they're like nodding off and saying like, dude, you know, not getting out sleep. No, man, I was playing World of, you know, whatever their video game till 3 a.m. I'm like, okay, but that's not everybody's home situation, but it has become the norm for a lot. So even see our basic like physical functioning, the cumulative effect of that, we're seeing a lot of those consequences come in as well.
Yeah. There, at the end of this, there are some resources that Jeff put together, but one of them I wanted to kind of throw out there and add to. This is, again, going to be contradictory because I follow this person on Instagram, so there it is. But it's an organization called Protect Young Eyes. I don't know if any of you all know of that or follow them, but it's a really good resource for internet safety and things of that nature. And one of the things that his name is Chris McKenna, is the organizer of this. And one of the things he talks about is something called the toxic trio, which is the bedroom, darkness, and boredom. And so if you think about a 13-year-old boy that's in his room and he's bored and it's dark and he's got his iPad, can find anything he wants and probably not some good stuff, right? And so being able to really think about, again, that child's brain, being able to discern that and know, you know, where the limits are and where the lines are, they're just not equipped to do that. Their brains can't do that yet. And so being able to really rein in those three things is one way that you can, you know, protect your kids from some of those other things. So screens out of the bedroom at night particularly is a pretty big thing. And I'll say I'm guilty of not monitoring that like I should. And then I read these things and think, oh shoot, I gotta do better about that.
Yeah. Let's look at our next slide here. These are just some of the big picture takeaways from the book as well. Just looking at, again, the increased rates of mental health concerns. So dramatic increases in anxiety, depression, and self-harm, particularly among girls. So we see between 2010 and 2020, again, this Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, like 150% increase in depression. What would be called the Instagram effect. So for a lot of girls, heightened anxiety, more comparison. They're often what he described as called defend mode, because there's just a lot of unsavory people online, whether it's bullying, whether it's sexual predators. I mean, you just never know what your kid might encounter. Not even trying to find trouble, it's just there. And then for guys, so much of it, of course, is overstimulation with sexuality. And so literally when he was talking about the rewiring, I mean, when you have a screen in your face, I mean, it's creating dopamine, all these chemicals, and then it's hard to feel normal or self-regulate without that. So we're seeing all of these like poor coping. So a lot of kids, whether it's the inattentive behaviors, the difficulty with self-regulation, a lot of this is because of just they've not learned the social skills in the real world for self-regulation, for emotional regulation, for coping with anxiety or anger. And then the way that they're kind of self-soothing is just kind of the mind-numbing scrolling. And then we just look at all the research on attention spans, it's getting shorter for all of us, right? And part of that, you know, even these newer platforms like with, you know, now with TikTok, what's the average like TikTok video? Like 6 seconds or something?
I'm not on TikTok.
So it's like used to, it's not even the long-form YouTube videos. It's like we're getting more and more condensed.
Yeah, the shorts.
And then the brain essentially then consumes information in these microdoses that then creates, you know, this tendency for that's how we want to consume things. Like my kids don't want to watch movies except the ones that they really like, because it's like they just don't have the attention span for it. You know, some kids could sit and then doom scroll for hours, but don't have the attention to watch like a longer form media. And part of that is just how we've impacted our brains through what we've exposed it to.
Yeah. I want to say something particularly about the difference in girls and boys from Gen Z and on, what we're seeing. So girls particularly much more impacted by social media and this constant comparison. That tends to be the place that really drives a lot of their anxiety and depression. Seeing the influencers, seeing other people's posts and things of that nature, and then comparing themselves and feeling less than most of the time, even though they are perfectly fine just the way they are. But for boys, it's different. It's not so much social media. It's more the gaming and the pornography that happens. And particularly those two things, it's this idea of interacting in a virtual world where there's no risk. You can game all day long and you're not really killing anybody, right? You're killing zombies or whatever you're doing. And those types of things then, when they get out in the real world, they're not equipped for the realities of interaction because they've been just living in this virtual world. So they really end up feeling very isolated, and this idea, and Jeff mentioned it earlier, this failure to launch. Particularly, young men, I would say probably from, graduation age, 18 to 25, you kind of expect them to go off into the world at some level and kind of begin to develop their life. And we're not seeing that with the same consistency as we would previously. Teenagers not wanting to drive. I was chomping at the bit to get my driver's license and get my car and go. And now we have young people who are terrified to drive and not being able to launch out in the world the way we would want them to. And a lot of that, again, is because they haven't experienced the real world risk in enough ways to feel confident. They've only experienced this virtual, no risk world that is just not. It's not reality.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Let's move to the next one here. This is where we get a little bit more practical. And again, the book has some of these recommendations. First and foremost, guys, just the monitoring. Like, we have to have some kind of limits here is his biggest point. Like, any of these technologies, TV, iPad, phone, gaming, etc., there needs to be some screen-free times. And guess what, guys? We have to model that as adults as well. It needs to become part of our family culture that we would allow some time that's developmentally appropriate, but then we also have some times that involves, again, free play, social interaction, these things that are much more about building self-esteem, meaningful relationships, all of these kinds of things. Experiences. Yeah. The other thing, and again, I'm always hesitant to say, oh, here's a hard number, because as Robin alluded to, the maturity level of every child is going to be different. What Haidt found in his research, just some general recommendations, is that the age is based on a number of factors, but he recommended no smartphone before high school and social media before 16. Now, that is very, very atypical, frankly. And part of where this comes from is just the peer pressure and socialization, because your kid's going to be an outlier if you don't just give them the phone at a much younger age or give them the iPad at a much younger age. And so that you're going to be dealing with the social pressure that if you try to follow some of these recommendations, you're going to get pushback from both your kid as well as the broader culture. I mean, not to step into like social political stuff, but one of the things the state of Arkansas has done is taken away, in part, this kind of research, taken away cell phones during the school day.
Yep.
And I'll tell you what, the early returns from the people that I've talked to, maybe it creates a little inconvenience with real-time communication to some degree, but I've had a lot of teachers tell me, it's like, wow, a lot of the bullying stuff has seemed to go down.
It's transformative.
Like, we've noticed a little more attention and stuff. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's not shocking or surprising, right? When the intended purpose of school should be learning and socialization, and yet we've seen an increased amount of time over the last 20 years, particularly with the handheld devices. More and more kids are just distracted, unmotivated to learn, indifferent towards real socialization because the relationship with their screen is stronger than with the humans in the environment. So really, the last part of this book, there's some strong recommendations for the government, for school systems, and we'll see how long, that we're going to see a bit more regulation, because like anything, we have to find that balance. But I definitely think enough of the research is coming back saying, hey, we've got a societal problem here that we're going to have to find some ways to do a little bit better, both inside of our homes, but even more of a systemic level within our culture.
Did you all know that the age of internet consent is 13? That a 13-year-old, or I guess if you put in a different birthday, whatever age you are, you can consent to a gaming company or online social media to have your personal information. I don't know that I would trust my 13-year-old to be able to make a good decision about that, and yet that's the age of consent is 13. A couple of things I want to mention about like changes we can make or things you can implement to try to help this. I actually did this when my kids were younger. I've again, fallen off the wagon a little bit, but something I call No Screen Saturdays. And what that was basically from about the time of like 9 a.m. till 5 p.m., for example, that on Saturdays that we did something else, that they did something else besides, watch YouTube or game or whatever else. And it was painful, certainly, painful for me and for them. But what I found was if we were really consistent with that, we had a lot more connection in our house. We had a lot more interactions. We just did more things together. And my kids were much more compliant with things that I asked them to do or that sort of thing. Just that little bit of time every week where it wasn't about their screens, that was a pretty big deal. So I encourage you, maybe you can't do a whole Saturday, maybe you can just do a couple of hours here or there or whatever, but finding some time where that's limited is really important. And then there's another kind of movement. I don't know if y'all have heard of this. It's called Wait Till 8th. And this is really about, even longer if you can actually, again, delaying actually smartphones. We're not talking about dumb phones, flip phones and things that don't have any internet access that all you can do is like call and text. Really talking about things that have internet access and that sort of thing. Really waiting as long as you can to put that in the hands of your kids. And then social media, not before high school 16.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say, guys, part of this is still making it relational. So I think it really works better when you have these open conversations with your kid. We don't want to just go to this place with technology's bad and evil and we're just stripping it away. That's unrealistic. What we want to do is involve them in being more discerning consumers of technology. So creating a home environment where you tell your kids, hey, anytime you have a question about anything you see online, let's talk about it. Encouraging them when they're watching shows or TV, let's talk about the characters. Let's talk about the content. How does that align with what we believe as a family? So I think we want to create this relationship with our kids where it's not like technology's the enemy or anything like that. We want to make it very relational based in informing them, but also including them in the conversation so that they can be more empowered and equipped. And maybe, obviously, they're going to maybe want more time with it than what you're comfortable with. But I think the more you make it conversational and have them part of the decision making, the more it can offset some of that conflict in the battle, because that's not what we want. We want them to understand, hey, this is a tool that can be fun and helpful. We just want to put a little bit of limits around it and be a bit more discerning about what are those messages. And actually next week, what we're going to target, Jonathan Haidt, the author, is a self-proclaimed atheist. He grew up in a Jewish home, but he has a profound respect for religion and religious rituals and communities. Chapter 8 of the book, in fact, talks about the virtues and importance of spiritual practices. So really next week, we're going to spend a bit more time talking more of kind of what are the spiritual implications of this and how do we really bring more of that conversation into the culture of our family systems. And really, this is just one piece of a much broader and larger conversation. And I think when we look at it, as we will in a much more holistic way, what was God's creational intent for how humans were to live purposeful lives? And how can screens maybe be a small part of enhancing some of that? But how can our relationship with it be still balanced enough that we're really cultivating a living environment that's good for our heart, mind, and soul?
We're created for real connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I want to make sure we hit just some of these resources here, guys, are in the back of there. Let's go to the next slide here. Yeah, so some of these recommended resources are actually back on the table. Another book that I would recommend in addition to this one is The Anxious Generation Goes to Church. Okay, and this is taking some of this information and some of these themes and looking at how does this influence churches, families. So if you want just kind of the cliff notes of the book, but with more of a spiritual focus, I think this book here by Tom Rainer is really good. There's a few other ones listed here, and we'll make sure that we print out these resources for our Q&As, so you guys will be able to have a take-home sheet. That'll be in a couple of weeks that we'll make sure we have that available. The next slide has some recommended podcasts. I don't know about you guys, but I love podcasts, right? Like when I'm driving or I'm doing work around the house, I just love throwing on good content. And this is part of this empowered parenting, equipped parenting. We don't have to have all the answers. Thankfully, there's a lot of good resources out there that can equip us. And so we'll make sure we have all of this stuff available for you in the future weeks. One more slide here. Mental health resources. So again, we want to have open conversations with our kid. We want to do all of these things to create a home that's receptive to good mental, emotional health. And I would say part of that is there's times where we just need some additional help and support. So our office, literally on the back side of the building here, right behind us, we have our own private entrance back here. As Robin said, most of our stuff isn't with younger kids. Usually adolescence is more of our focus than adults. Living Well counseling and Secure Foundation counseling. These are some other Christian-based resources in the area that we work with and refer clients to. But if you need a little additional support as a parent or your kids, always be aware this is why we exist, is to support this church and this community. And all Southwest affiliated folks get 2 free sessions every year. So if you'd want to kind of take some of these conversations a bit further and figure out how could we personalize it for your life, for your home, we certainly encourage you guys to be open to that.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I want to say is that, if in all this information today you sort of realize, oh, maybe I've taken a wrong turn somewhere, or I'm not doing some of these things, and I want to make that correction, but you don't know how. Maybe you're not even equipped to know how to do that. And obviously doing that in every family is going to look different. Part of why we're here is to sort of help walk you through that one-on-one to try to figure out, okay, how do we make some of these adjustments so that we hopefully steer our kids more toward the middle as far as virtual versus real world, and maybe mitigate some of the potential for depression and anxiety that could come. So we want to be able to do that for you all if you're like, I want to do this, but I don't know how. That's what we're here for.
All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much for your time and attention. I'm going to say a brief prayer, and then we'll get you out of here to pick up your kiddos or get on your way.
Don't forget to make your questions, too.
Yes, questions. Father God, we're so grateful for this time we could gather in your name. We want to thank you for being a good father, a good parent, Lord. We're so thankful for your word, which gives us truth, Lord. And every generation has new and unique challenges. So, Father, we want for this series in our conversations to equip us and empower us, but also that we can have the knowledge and the confidence to know that we're not alone in this journey. You're here with us and for us as we do our best, Father, to model and just be people who love you and who show our kiddos and our entire community what faithful living looks like. Help us, Father, grow in the areas we need to grow in. And we just want to give you full reign. That is, we continue these conversations throughout the month of January. Lord, it can just be nurturing and equipping for each person, each parent, each grandparent, each person who has a relationship with a child and has an influence there. We just want to invite you into that. And we're just so grateful and thankful for your presence and work as we all journey together to do our best to create a church family that just does a good job of nurturing our children in your name. And we pray all this in the strong name of Christ. Amen. If you wouldn't mind, put that